Welcome to WitchLit, a place to talk about the craft of writing and writing the craft. I'm your host, Victoria Rashke, author, publisher, witch, and nosy Scorpio. WitchLit is a production of Thousand Volt Press. Our small press publishes books we want to see in the world, including Changing Paths by Yvonne Abreu, Conjuring the Commonplace by Lane Fuller and Corey Thomas Hutchison of New World Witchery podcast, and Verona Green, my latest book. Find out more about us and purchase these and other titles at thousandvoltpress.com. Kate Anderson lives in Utah with her husband and 4 children. When she's not writing, she's embroidering her favorite book covers, exploring the mountains, or planning road trips to places that are off the beaten path. The weirder, the better. Here Lies Olive is her first book. Kate Anderson, welcome to WitchLit.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. And I really loved your book and I can't wait to talk about it. But the first question we ask everybody on the show is, especially I think in this age of visual medium, like why still write? Why still write books?
I love that question. And I've actually been thinking about this all week because some days I ask myself the same thing. I think, why am I doing this? Some days it's really, really hard. And I actually told my husband earlier this week, I was like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. And he kind of laughed and was like, you have said that before. So apparently I go through these phases. For me, I have stories in my head. They just keep popping into my head all the time, everywhere I go. People I meet, places, settings. I just am constantly thinking of new stories that I want to tell. And I really enjoy sitting down and getting those out on screen, not on paper, but on screen.
So Here Lives Olive is your first book. It's, I would say YA. Is that what?
Yes.
Classed it as, yeah. Although I will say I'm not usually a YA reader because of the tropey, like love triangle stuff more than anything. This book does not have that trope, which I love.
Yeah.
But I did want to kind of let you talk about like kind of your experience of getting published for the first time and what that's been like and working with Flux and all of that.
Yeah. So I actually have a different path to publication than most traditionally published authors do. I was offered a contract with Flux before I had an agent. Mm-hmm. And usually for most writers, they query an agent and then are able to sign with an agent. And then the agent sends their books out to publishers on submission. So Here Lies Olive was the third book that I had queried. And it was pretty early on in the query process still. I saw a tweet from Ashton Stan, who is my editor at Flux, and she was asking for spooky books. And then I saw that she was willing to accept unagented manuscripts. So I sent it out to her, not really thinking anything would come of it. And was very pleased and a little bit surprised when she loved it and said she wanted to take it to acquisitions. So it went through 3 rounds of acquisitions with the team at Flux. And then they did offer me a contract, which I was super excited about, but I still wanted to have representation, not just for this book, but I had been trying to find an agent to represent me for several years because I want someone who will represent me for my whole career and be a partner. So Flux very graciously gave me a couple of weeks to send out some last minute queries with this offer. And I was able to sign with an agent really quickly. They answer you really, really quickly if you put offer of publication in the subject line. So I was able to sign with an agent, and then she finished the negotiations and we signed the contract. I think it was about 2 months from the initial offer date to when I signed the contract with Flux, because that took up, the finding the agent and then negotiations as well.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. That's great that you could get the offer without an agent and then still do all the negotiation with an agent. That's pretty awesome.
It was really, I cannot imagine it working out any better. It was just it worked out so wonderfully. It was such such a relatively easy process in a field that is full of waiting and uncertainty, and it can be very difficult, but this was really smooth and it went great. And I couldn't be happier with Flux either. They're wonderful.
As I say, the cover is gorgeous, by the way.
Thank you.
Did a great job.
Thank
it's
you.
just one of those books where you pick it up and you're like, oh, I want to read this immediately just from looking at the cover.
Oh, well, thank you.
So let's talk about what's inside the book. Do you want to give like a little synopsis for folks who haven't read? A non-spoiler synopsis for folks who haven't read?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, just like a real quick little tagline. So Here Lies Olive is about a 16-year-old girl named Olive who is struggling with kind of an existential crisis. She had a near-death experience several years earlier, and rather than, feel like she was going towards her light or something, she saw nothing, and it really scared her. And so she has been struggling with this existential crisis of, is there something after we die? And if there's not, then like, what's the point? And in order to deal with that, she decides the best course of action is to summon a ghost to answer her questions about the afterlife. But when she summons the ghost, she accidentally traps him in her world. So she has to figure out a way to help him move on and hopefully find the answer to her question.
Mm-hmm. And I love the world that you've built around Olive, or the world you built for Olive. For folks who haven't had the pleasure of reading it yet, Olive lives in a fictional town in New Mexico called Whitehaven. That is the dark tourism capital of the United States, which I just loved. And I was so sad to learn it wasn't real.
I know, me too. Like, wouldn't that be great? Whitehaven is actually, it's not really based on this town, but my original idea, what helped me come up with this setting, is a real town in Colorado. It's called Crestone, and it has the only open air funeral pyre in the Western Hemisphere. So I heard an NPR story about it a few years ago. This open air funeral pyre was so popular among people that they had to pass an ordinance that only citizens of the town could be cremated on the open air funeral pyre. And because of that, it led to lots of terminally ill or elderly people moving to Crestone to become citizens. And so that after they died, they could be cremated on the open air funeral pyre. And I just thought that was such a fascinating idea, to think of this town that was really kind of embracing death. And that gave me the idea for Whitehaven, thinking like, okay, well, if there's a lot of terminally ill people moving, then, are there going to be more funeral homes opening up, or more hospice or things like that? That was kind of my inspiration for Whitehaven.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And everybody basically works in the death industry somehow. Like her dad is a tombstone carver, and her mom is a cosmetician,
mortuary cosmetologist. Yep.
Yeah. So I could not think of the word, but it's just, I love the idea of this. Like, it kind of has like Salem, Massachusetts vibes, but also not. Like, it's a little darker even than Salem. I mean, Salem kind of, I feel like, is kind of like the Disneyfication of witches in some ways. And this is
oh yeah, for sure.
This is a little different. But I just love the town and the people and everything you've built around Olive. So for folks who have not read yet, Olive does a little ritual. And I was curious, like, what your research for kind of, I guess, the death industry stuff too, but like also like the magic that happens in the book around, or the paranormal things that happen in the book around what Olive does to summon the ghost and with other supernatural beings in the book.
Mm-hmm. I'm kind of embarrassed to say I didn't really do any research. I just made it all up. I'm not a practitioner. I have total respect for everyone. And so I hope that doesn't come across as like disrespectful. maybe, that I just kind of made these things up. But I really wanted Olive to be, she's kind of grasping at straws.
Mm-hmm.
She's kind of like, this is like, she doesn't necessarily believe in anything. And so she's just doing anything she can think of. So as far as her little ritual, I just kind of made up something that I thought sounded spooky and like it would summon a ghost for someone who doesn't really know anything.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I didn't really put a lot of research into it. The death industry stuff, I read just a couple of articles. Like there's an article about that town, Crestone, but again, it wasn't really a very research heavy book for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of world building because I mean, it is set, like contemporary. Although I will say that's one of the things I really enjoyed about the book is that though you think of it as a contemporary setting, they kind of have this like 1950s vibe about them.
Yes.
So,
yes.
so it's like you can be kind of, it's almost like an overlay of anachronism, but it's not really anachronism. It's just their style. Like they're into rockabilly music and they have a sock hop and, that kind of stuff, but it's not really anachronism.
I am so glad that you picked up on that 1950s vibe. I feel like that it was a lot stronger in earlier versions and just through the process of editing, most things change. But yeah, that was always my vision for it, was that it's this like kooky little town that's almost stuck in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Like your middle America, mid-century kind of like Leave It to Beaver type town. Or I guess a better example might be Stars Hollow. I guess I don't know if everyone knows Leave It to Beaver nowadays, but like a Stars Hollow little town where everybody is friendly, everybody gets along, but there's this death industry that kind of is over everything. So yeah, that was intentional, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's such a. I was talking. I have a writers group that meets every week, and I was telling them about your book, and I was just like, one of the things that I love about it is because it's so easy when you write a book now to date it based on like the technology and like all of the stuff, because that stuff changes so fast now, right? And you think about like books even written 20 years ago, like feel dated because they don't have cell phones with cameras or, just those are just kind of funny things. And I was like, what a great way to get around some of that, because the town has this vibe where you can say those things. Like she can drive, James Dean's car.
Yeah.
And that's not a big deal. And people will know who that is because it's their aesthetic, like it kind of gets away. It gets around being an adult trying to write a 16-year-old too, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't have to like keep up with all the slang. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Because they kind of have their own.
Yeah.
Yeah. I enjoyed that. And one of the things I will say about, kind of the Leave It to Beaver, I think folks know it at least as a reference, if not,
I hope they do. I don't know. I do have teenagers and they kind of did. I mean, they've heard Leave It to Beaver, but they weren't super clear on it. So who knows?
But I mean, one of the things I thought was interesting about it is that very 50s vibe, sock hops and, poodle skirts and that whole thing. But like things happen with Olive. And I don't want to spoil that part, but people don't react. Like it's not a big deal.
Right. Yeah.
Like what?
I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I think, I love, if I could choose a decade, I would choose the 50s or the 60s. I love the clothes. I love the music. I love the whole aesthetic of it. Would I actually want to live during that time based on how protected classes were treated? No, definitely not. So I thought it was fun to kind of take all the fun parts of that era that I really liked, but like plop them down here where there's a lot more tolerance, and a little bit healthier dynamics.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that. And it didn't feel forced. Like, you know, sometimes you feel like, oh, this is like a Pollyanna version of the world. But it kind of reminded me of like a lot of the folks I love to follow people who do like historical clothing. You make historical
Oh
clothing.
yeah,
And they
those are
always talk
fun.
about
Yes.
vintage style, not vintage values. It was
Yes.
kind of the vibe. That was kind of the vibe, you know.
That
It's like,
is, oh, that's perfect. I haven't heard that before, but yes, I'm going to use that because that's totally me.
yeah. And I was like, okay, this is really fun. And I just like that part of it. I mean, I think that's one of the best things about being a writer, right? Is that you get to create that world.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely fun. Anything I can imagine, I can create it. Yeah. That's that's the most fun part of being a writer, I think, for sure.
So one of the things kind of on that I wanted to ask you about in the acknowledgments, you mentioned that you worked with a sensitivity reader because the town is very close to the Dene Navajo Nation, and some of the characters are Navajo Dene folks.
Right.
So you worked with a sensitivity reader. So what was that process like?
So I was really lucky. One of my daughter's good friends is Navajo, and her mother was so gracious and helped me with this. She read through the, I don't think it was the very final draft, but she read through maybe the second to last draft for me and left some notes. And she also answered, I don't know, I probably texted her dozens of questions as I was writing that draft, you know, just asking like, oh, well, is this insensitive? But also asking questions like, well, would he say it like this? Or would it matter if he, you know, treated something like this? Or what would he call his grandparents? You know, things like
Mm-hmm.
that. So
Right.
she answered so many questions. Her she shared some of her family's experiences with like uh boarding schools, Indian boarding schools in, you know, 100 years ago. Maybe it wasn't even that long ago. I unfortunately don't, I think it might be more recent. But
Mm-hmm.
so she was able to share some of the trauma that her direct family members suffered and how that trauma has trickled down through the generations and how it affects her and her children today. So that was really, really helpful because that was kind of one of the themes that my Navajo character was dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's so important. And I mean, I feel like this is an ongoing conversation for, you know, especially white people who are writing books. Like, you don't want to write books that are only white people, right? But you also
Right.
you want to write the diverse, rich world we live in, but you also want to be sensitive to those things. So I think, you know, folks who aren't aware of sensitivity readers or things like that, it's such a good way to make sure that you are including diversity, but you're not skewing it with your own lens as a white person. So
Yeah. That's such a difficult conversation talking about diversity in books because yes, I want my books and my characters to be diverse. But do I, as a white woman, have the right or the knowledge to write a story about somebody whose background I don't share?
mm-hmm.
I, for myself, I don't think I would ever write a story with a point of view character with a heritage that I don't share. I don't think that I can do it justice. And I don't really think it's my place. I feel like that story should be told by someone who's living that.
Right.
So having other characters in it, I think is for me a better solution. But yeah, it's still, you know, it needs to be done with sensitivity and it needs to be done with intention and thought and not just like, oh, well, I need more people of color. So let's just, you know, make this person. Like, I think it needs to be a part of their character arc and not just a change in words on the page.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it, you know, it goes for me just in, you know, I've gone to some seminars and you know, I've talked to writer friends and, you know, kind of everybody is trying to do better and really look at this issue. And I agree with you. I don't think I would ever write a point of view character from who was someone who wasn't, a white, probably female even. I don't know that I mean, I haven't really I've written like side character, like point of view stuff, but not really main character, even as a man. So like not that I'm saying people can't do that. I just personally haven't, and I haven't thought about it. So
yeah.
But yeah, I think it's just really, it's just something to continue. And the one is that we'll never arrive, right? All we can do is strive to be better about this. And I think it's just an ongoing conversation, but I just appreciate the work that sensitivity readers do and that they're willing to do it. And, and then, compensation and all that is a whole other story, but
oh yeah, definitely.
But it's just such a helpful thing. And because I don't live in a world that's just white people. I don't live in a world of people that just look like me. And I don't want to write books like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Because everybody deserves to see themselves represented in a book. Plus, how boring would it be if every book was exactly, just a white cast? Like,
yeah,
we would really miss out on a lot of stories there.
Well, and I think, not that fiction has to be reality, but I mean, the book is set in New Mexico. Like, of course, there are going to be, people who are indigenous heritage, and there's going to be, people who were there when it was part of New Spain. And, like, there's just going to be lots of different kind of people who live there. So,
yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. But yeah, I like that you included it in the acknowledgments too, because I think it's just important for readers and writers to know that that's something you can do. And I think if you're working with a traditional house, it's more likely to be something that they will ask you to do, I think.
Oh, yeah. And Flux was very supportive of me using a sensitivity reader. It was kind of up to me to find one. And like I said, I was lucky. I did have some other ideas. If anybody wants ideas, there are several Navajo restaurants near me. So one of my ideas before I realized that my daughter had a Navajo friend. Mm-hmm. I thought I could go to some of those restaurants, ask if anybody there was interested or knew somebody who was interested, because they are indigenous owned, the ones near me. Mm-hmm. So that was my first idea. Just, if anybody's trying to figure out where to start looking for a sensitivity reader, I think restaurants or cultural associations in your area are probably a good place to start, at least give you, a starting point.
Right. And I think some bigger publishers, I haven't worked with a big publisher, so I don't know, but I think from what I've heard, they also have people that they have like a list of people that they work with or things like that.
I'm sure that like the big 5 publishers probably have people that they have worked with, or, organizations that they have worked with.
Yeah. But I think if you're with a smaller press or independently published, finding somebody may be a little more of a challenge, but I think those are good suggestions. And I've noticed too, like on social media, there are a lot of people who now will have, sensitivity reader in their bio. So they're, can find those folks on social media too, which is great.
Oh yeah. That's a great one too.
So October release for spooky season. So what, I think the flip side of the fun stuff, and then, like also the business stuff, is the marketing part.
Yeah. Marketing's hard.
Yeah. Like, I think that's it. The marketing is hard. So for you, like, what is that challenge? Because I assume you have some support from Flux on the marketing end of things, but they're a smaller press. So you're not getting like Simon and Schuster level of.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know anything about marketing. I don't know anything. I don't know what the options even are. Flux is really great with social media. They set up social media, like virtual book tours for when the cover was released. And now that we have physical copies out there, they did like an Instagram bookstagrammer tour. And then I am not a huge fan of social media. I just don't really, I'm not great at doing it. But, I think nowadays marketing relies mostly on social media. So that's been our focus. I'm not good at marketing. I don't really know what else there is to do, honestly. I need someone else to tell me. I need to like take a class or something, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I know so few people who started out as writers who had marketing jobs. I mean, that they're out there, and that a lot of those people are selling, $4,000 courses for you to,
Yeah.
figure out how to flog your books. But
Yeah.
it's like it's a different part of my brain. Like I
Yeah.
want to write, I want to tell stories and talk to people on a podcast. I don't want to do ads. I don't want to, do all that stuff.
And I know that is a common thing among like creatively minded people. I've seen like reels and stuff on Instagram of people saying not just writers, but like small shop owners and craft shop owners and artists and things, saying, I read that to be successful small business, you have to create content. And so here's my content, and it kind of made me chuckle because that's exactly how I feel. Like I don't want to be creating content. I just want to be writing. But I think even with nowadays, even if you're with a really big publisher, they expect you to do social media. They expect you to participate in that kind of thing. That's just, that's part of it now. It's not a fun part.
No. And I think there's even like some expectation with some bigger publishers that you already have a following, that you've already made a mark somehow. And I think, that's really hard. That's really hard to think about, like how to do that. But
I know that's definitely true in the nonfiction world, that it's really expected to have a big following for that. That was one thing, Flux, before they offered me a contract, they did ask me if I had like what my social media engagement was, and it's not high, and it was a lot smaller then too, like my author account. So they didn't have like super high standards for me, but I think they were mostly they wanted to see that I was willing to try and put some of the work into it. So yeah, even though I feel like I just don't really know what I'm doing, I try my best.
Yeah, it's really it's a challenging thing, and it's something that the people go to school for, like or work in industries for a while to learn it. So I think like social media content creation is one thing, but you're fighting the algorithm,
right? Yeah,
that all of those things. So I think it's just a challenge, and it kind of sucks the fun out of the publishing part.
It kind of does.
Yeah.
One thing, I'm in a 2023 debuts group with lots of other authors who debuted this year. When we started this group about a year and a half ago, once people had announced and stuff, and then up at the beginning of this year when books started being released, it was really fun. It was a very active group. There was lots of sharing and boosting each other's posts and stuff. And now that it's October and we're finally to my point, I'm kind of like burnt out on doing all of that stuff. I feel like that's, I think, maybe one of the cons of having a book released towards the end of the year is there's a lot of hype and excitement at the beginning of a year for books coming out. And then as the year goes on, it's harder. I mean, even for me as the author, it's harder to be like really hyped up about it.
Yeah. Well, and it's just such a long process. I mean, we talked a little bit before we started recording, and, from the time you sign with the traditional publisher, from the time you sign the contract and the time you see your book in your hand is about 2 years, right? So that's a long time, and it's a lot of work, and there's a lot going on. And then there's a lot of periods where you don't know what's going on. So and then on the independent side, you're kind of racing up until the last minute because you're doing everything yourself. And then the book is out there, and it's like, oh, what happens now? Like it's like this, you kind of walk off a cliff.
Yeah, it's kind of a strange feeling. And I think anyone who writes can probably relate to this. It's not just like it's a long time, but you also read your own words so many times that you kind of lose all, like, I read things and I'm like, is this good? Is this like, I can't even tell anymore. I don't even know because you've just read it so many times. So that's kind of difficult for me. I have to kind of like take a step back after I turn things in and just try to forget everything I just wrote so that when I read it again, it can feel fresh.
Yeah. And I think that's it too. It's that you've read it, you know, if you're like me, you've read it like 1,000 times probably before it comes out. And it just stops having meaning.
Yeah. And I feel like I know every detail of my character. I know all of her motivations. I know what she's thinking. I know what she's feeling. So sometimes for me, it's hard to know, like, am I getting that out on the page or do I just feel like I am because I know it all in my head? It's hard to know, like, would a reader who hasn't had this character talking to them in their head for the past 3 years, would they know what she wants? That can be a hard one to kind of lose sight of as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely that. It's like, what's on the page? I mean, I bless beta readers for like, you know.
Yeah.
Going, by the way, like she does this thing and I have no idea why. Like, why does she do that? You know? Yeah.
Yeah. And
or
then
did
you're
you
like,
know there's
it's
a plot
so
hole?
obvious. Yeah.
My favorite one is
those
when they
are the
go,
worst.
by the way, there's a plot hole that you can drive a truck through. Did you know that? And I was like, no, thank you for pointing that out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, bless beta readers. So obviously, WitchLit would talk about spooky stuff on the show and occult things. So one of the things that I kind of wanted to talk to you about is obviously you've created a dark tourism capital. And in your bio, it says you like to do those things. So where are your spooky places you like to go?
Oh my gosh. I love weird places. They're not necessarily all spooky, but one of, like, really, besides writing, my absolute favorite thing to do is to plan road trips for my family. And we like to go to the weirdest things we can find. So let me think. Let me think. So actually, the reason Here Lies All of Us set in New Mexico is because about 5 years ago for spring break, we did a road trip through New Mexico. And we don't know anybody who lives in New Mexico. We don't have any friends or family there. So when I was telling people where I live in Utah, our plans for spring break, they were all like, do you have family there? And we would say no. And they were like, oh, why are you going to New Mexico then? I just thought it sounded cool. So we did kind of a Route 66 thing through New Mexico, stayed in some of the like classic Route 66 motels that have been there for decades. That was really fun. We love to find like weird roadside attraction type places. In Albuquerque, there was this place called Tinkertown that was, I don't really know if I can even describe it. It was like dioramas and whole buildings and hallways made out of like discarded beer bottles and things, and it was just really fun. So we really love to find just kind of kitschy, out of the way things. The more I can drive on like a back road and less on the interstate, the better, because that's where you see the weird stuff.
Yes, definitely. I have only been a resident of the West for 2 years. I am an East Coast girl, and but we drove when we moved all the way across with a 13-year-old cat, and so we got to stop and see a lot of those things, those weird things, and I was just like, yeah, the West is a different place. I mean, there's a lot of stuff on the East Coast, but it's a little more hidden because it wasn't part of that road trip culture as much as the West was in like the 50s and 60s and the early road trip culture. But there's just so much stuff. There's so much stuff. I mean, I grew up in Tennessee. So for folks who are Neil Gaiman fans, they will know about Rock City in Chattanooga, Tennessee. That is...
I know about that. My family lived in Tennessee for 15 years. After I was an adult, my parents moved there. And they loved Rock City. So yeah, that's a fun one.
Yeah, it's great. The thing about Rock City that I think people who have not been don't know is that it's a beautiful outdoor area with trails, and there's like a overlook where you can see 7 states if it's clear. You know, it's really beautiful outdoor space. But there's this thing called the Fairyland Caverns that are like dioramas, but with day-glow paint and black lights and fairies and gnomes mining. And it's a whole thing. It's kind of creepy and fascinating and so very like otherworldly when you go in. Like, I am not surprised Neil Gaiman decided to set part of his book there. So
that seriously sounds like the best. I love that kind of thing. There is a place here in Utah, down by Moab, which is where Arches National Park is, and is such a fun place to visit. There's a place called Hole in the Rock, and it's a house that has been chiseled out of the big sandstone cliffs. Just a guy, like a self-trained guy, not like an engineer or anything. He used dynamite and blasted himself a house. It's like 3,000 square feet too. It's really big. Back in like the 40s or 50s. And that is a really fun place to visit. And you can go on tours of the house, which is in the cliff. And that's really cool. But then outside, they also have a bunch of like kitschy stuff. And it's a fun place. We like that one.
Oh, that sounds great. I mean, it's like Petra kind of in the desert of Utah, it sounds like. Yeah.
I don't even know if this is like a kind of art, but we call, in my family, our favorite kind of art is what we call desert art, because there is a lot of art out in the desert, and it's mostly found objects that have been sculpted and put together into really, really fascinating things. And yeah, so when we go on road trips, they usually take us to some sort of desert art installation.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I don't know if you're a fan of Atlas Obscura. Do you know Atlas Obscura?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Yeah. So like every day I get their email and I'm just like, I want to go there. I want to go there. No, I want to go there. And some of them are like really far away and probably places I will never get to visit. But some of them are like, that is literally in San Jose. I'm going to go see that place.
Yeah. There's a lot of Atlas Obscura is great. And that's one of my road trip planning resources that I always use. Because every time, whatever town or city we go to, I always look it up to see if there's something great there. And there usually is. There's a lot of cool stuff out there.
Yeah. I mean, and their database is so huge now. Like I think you can go just anywhere and there's going to be something either there where you're going or close by or on the way. But yeah, it's just, I love weird tourism. I don't know that I am a dark tourism person. Like I'm not, like I have been to some of those places that people consider dark tourism. I guess it depends on where you are on the spectrum of what you consider dark tourism. Those are not places I seek out. Like I find those very disturbing. And I don't, I mean, I don't know that I'm sensitive or whatever, but when I was in college, we went to Auschwitz on a trip when we were in Poland. And it was the only place I've told people, it's the only place I've ever been that felt like the earth underneath me was dead.
Yeah. That doesn't appeal to me really at all. I mean, I guess that people do consider that dark tourism. That doesn't really appeal to me. When I think of dark tourism, I guess I'm thinking more, I don't know, like Salem, like we were talking about Salem,
like
Massachusetts.
Spooky kind of,
yeah, spooky, but not
haunted
like
houses and not. Yeah, I mean, I think
or like
I
urban
felt like
legend type places.
Yeah, like I felt it was really important to go while we were there to see the museum there is incredible and the curation is incredible and they have people you can talk to, and I think it's just important to witness, really to go as a witness and to understand what happened. But like why we were there, I will never forget this because I was so like in my head and like just it was such a strange day, and there was a tour group of children who were laughing and running and kind of pushing each other. And, and it just was so incongruous with what was going on around us that like it just kind of shocked me out of the experience. And I was like, maybe they're not ready. Like if that's the reaction, like why take little kids there if they can't?
Yeah.
I don't know. It was such a strange experience. So I don't seek things like that out, but like urban legends and like I have a friend who a couple years ago went to West Virginia to where the Mothman stuff is.
Oh, cool. Yeah. See, that kind of thing is like,
shared pictures with us. Yeah. Like that kind of stuff appeals more to me.
That's right up my alley.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that stuff where it's like there are creepy stories, but maybe nothing ever happened there. And it's more fun to think about than it's not really something you have to really think about. I mean, sorry, I'm getting all twisted around. It's fun to kind of go and visit, but you don't have to think too deeply about what might have actually happened there.
Yeah. I think there's a difference. Though I have heard people talk about memorial places like Auschwitz and like Ground Zero and the Oklahoma City bombing memorial. They've talked about them as dark tourism. It's like, I don't think that's dark tourism. Those are memorials. They're there for a reason. It's not.
Yeah.
Those are not fun trips. Like that's not, for me, like I think it's more about, like you said, it's like supernatural stuff or ghost stories or things like that. It's not about, it's just different. And like I said, those things are important. And I'm not saying don't go to those things and you're weird if you go to those things. That is not what I'm saying at all. I think they're important. But I think when people talk about dark tourism, I don't think we have a good definition yet that works, that when people are talking about it, they're talking about the same thing.
Because like if I hear dark tourism, I'm definitely thinking of more things like ghost tours. Like pretty much every city has a ghost tour nowadays, and those are fun, and they are usually very exaggerated, and a lot of them are like urban legend type things and stuff like that. So I mean, there's a spectrum from things like that all the way to going to places where we know horrible things have occurred. There is a spectrum.
Yeah, I'm definitely on the fun end of that spectrum. Yeah, I was thinking about walking tours. Like I love walking tours in cities, and even ones that don't necessarily have like ghost story elements. Like just finding out about the history of a place. Like we did one years ago when I went to London, and it was a history of the Great Fire.
Oh, interesting. That would be very interesting.
It wasn't really like a ghost story or anything, but like we went to Pudding Lane to where the monument is, and we started there, and then we talked about what happened, on the days of the Great Fire and rebuilding afterwards. And it was just such an incredible walk. And there was some, spooky. I mean, the Great Fire was a calamity and all of that. So there was some stuff like that, but it was just such a great experience to walk through those places with someone who knew the history and could answer questions and, could, kind of slip you back in time a little bit while you're standing in front of, the Gherkin in London. It was just like, it was a great experience.
Oh, that sounds really cool.
So I do recommend those for folks, even if you don't like ghost tours or anything. Those kind of walks are great, just like the history walks and stuff. But yeah, we have still not ramped up our traveling post COVID, and I am chomping at the bit.
Oh yeah, there's so many places out there.
Yeah. And I mean, just moving here, like so much stuff that has been far away, being on the East Coast is now close. So that's kind of cool to be able to do that now too.
So it's like a whole new world opens up to you. Yeah. A whole new set of trips that you can take.
Yeah. Although I have noticed, and being from Utah, you probably know this, road trips in the West require way more car snacks because there is so much distance between everything.
I mean, you can drive, especially like Nevada and a lot of parts of California, you're driving 3 or 4 hours between any kind of little town.
Yeah.
So
it's a whole different thing, but there's lots of fun, interesting things out here. So for you, like for writing, like now that you've gotten this first book out, yay, congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you. so what's next for you? Like, what are your goals with your writing? Like, what's coming up for you? Like, I guess, what part is writing playing in your life now that you've gotten a book published?
Yeah. So I have another book coming out next October, also with Flex. So I'm about halfway through the revision process with that one right now. Um, and this one is special to me because it is actually the first book I ever wrote. Well, it's a rewrite of the first book I ever wrote. Back when I had no idea what I was doing. I wrote this story and it has changed a lot because I have improved a lot and I know what I'm doing now, but it's very special to me because it's the same characters, it's the same setting, same themes. So that's really special to me. So that is coming out next October of 2024.
That's awesome.
So right now, that's what I'm focusing on. I do have, like I said, my head is full of stories. So I do have, let me count real quick in my head. I've got about 4 other things that I've either started writing, like just drafting for fun, or they're works in progress, I guess. So I'm not sure which one I'm going to focus on after Lonely Places. That's my book that's coming out next year. I'm not sure what I'll focus on after that, but I have a handful of things that I've been thinking about for some of them for several years.
So is the new book Lonely Places, is that YA as well?
Yes, it is. It's young adults. This one is set in Utah. That's fun. It's set, maybe you've heard of this place if you like Atlas Obscura. It's set in Pando, which is a genetic aspen clone in central Utah. For a while, it was considered the largest organism on Earth. I think last time I read, there is now a fungi field in Oregon that is considered one organism and is bigger. But Pando it's a grove of aspen trees. They're all genetic clones. It's thought to be like 10,000 years old. So all the trees, it looks like you're walking through a grove of trees. You can't tell anything on the surface, but it's really cool to think about how underneath all of these trees are connected and they are a super organism, and it's been there for 10,000 years. So sorry, that was a little bit of a tangent, but Lonely Places is set at a fire lookout station in Pando in Utah. And it is young adults. It is about a family that has been kind of running from trauma for a long time, trying to avoid trauma rather than deal with things that have happened in their lives. And when they move into this fire lookout in Pando, that just some things start happening, creepy, weird things start happening in the woods that forces them to really confront it for the first time.
Yeah. Oh, cool. So, I feel like I kind of stepped away from reading YA when it did kind of go down that everything is a love triangle and the sullen girl and the 2 boys who love her who will save the world kind of thing. And
she's beautiful, but she doesn't know it.
Yeah, like there's a lot of that. And it was just like, and now I'm 50 and I'm like, I just can't relate to that so much. But what I found interesting about your book, it makes me think maybe I should give YA another chance, is like at no point did I feel like this wasn't written for anyone who wanted to read it. Like, yes, Olive is 16 and we're from it's first person point of view. But it is not like she has like a real problem, right? I mean, what happens after you die? That's huge. That's like a huge universal thing. And it's so much more about her relationship with her family and her friends. And yes, there's some romance that happens in there, but that is not the focus of the book. And it just felt like such a richer experience and reminded me of like books that I read when I was a YA reader when I was that age. And I feel like maybe we've come back around to those, like more about what it means
I
to
do think
self-actualize and come of age and all of that.
I think there are lots of really incredible YA books out there. I
Mhm.
think that you run into a lot of the like love triangle tropes and stuff in maybe more like fantasy and dystopian fiction. I think it seems like they often have those. And I love reading dystopian. That's like my favorite genre. Fantasy is harder for me, but I know people love fantasy and that's great. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those. It just seems to me like those tropes kind of show up a little bit more
Mhm.
in those genres. But yeah, a lot of YA, I mean, teenagers are going through a lot. There's a lot that they go through. And I think there are some really rich stories there. You know, a lot of people, I think there's a reason a lot of people are drawn to YA, and it's because a lot of us really feel those things. You know, no matter how old you get, you can either feel them or remember what it felt like.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, like I have teenagers. I am not a teenager anymore. Like I'm old enough that I have my own teenagers, but sometimes I still feel like one. Maybe I'm just immature. I don't know.
No,
But that was,
I think that's universal too, a little bit.
I think that was, it's maybe part of the reason is because we all have these like universal kind of angsty feelings. And by the time you're an adult, you can kind of deal with them. You have more experience, you can kind of deal with them better. And so I think maybe that's why YA is rewarding even to adults. I don't know.
Yeah. No, it makes sense to me. And I think, I always think about like when you're a teenager and even into your 20s, like the first time something happens and you have to deal with it, like you don't know what the other side of that problem looks like. You haven't done that yet.
Mm-hmm.
You haven't pushed
Yeah.
through something, a trauma or a problem to get to the other side and know that it's going to be okay. So it is kind of the end of the world while you're in it. Like it's just everything is ramped up because it's the first time you're dealing with it. So I think that aspect of it is true. And I look in the mirror and I know my face does not look like it. I'm in my 20s, but my brain sometimes goes, "How did I get here?" So I think that not realizing we're aging thing.
Yeah. When I have to tell someone how old I am, my first thought is 22. And I have not been 22 for a long time, but I think my brain like stopped at 22. Like that's my mental age for some reason. I'm done.
Well, there you go. Take advantage of it. You're writing YA. There you go. I think that's great.
It's fun. I get to relive those days.
Yeah. So like I said, we try and keep things to an hour because that's about my attention span as a podcast listener. But before we get to our last question, I want to give you an opportunity to just kind of plug what's coming up. We've talked a little bit about your next book, but if you have events or anything, this will air in December, which is crazy to think about. But yeah, so what's coming up for you and where can folks find you?
Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram at Kate Ander Writes. I'm also on Twitter, but not very regularly. So Instagram is more where you can find me. And on my Instagram profile, I have like a link tree that has all of my website. And right now it's full of stuff for Olive, like events and stuff for Olive. But that's what I keep updated mostly with upcoming events. And yeah, like I said, I'm mostly just focusing on Lonely Places. So next fall is when that will come out. And I'm sure I'll have some events then, but my brain can't go more than like a week in the future.
That I completely understand.
So I don't know any of them yet.
Yeah. I feel like I'm always out of time from like when I'm recording and things are going to air. And like, I never know like what day it is anymore because of that. I completely understand. So for our last question, I always joke on the show that I'm a Scorpio and I like to talk about things we're not supposed to talk about. So I'm going to roll a die and depending on what number I get, you'll get a question about death, sex, religion, politics, or money. And if I roll a 6, you get to pick which one you want.
Okay.
And these are written.
Okay.
The questions are written for you. So, I mean, some of them I do recycle. I will let people know. They've probably heard them. Some of them I do recycle, but I try to write new questions for every guest. So 3, religion. You can also pass.
Religion. Okay. What's the question? Let me hear your question.
So you have been made Pope of speculative fiction writers. And who are the first 3 writers that you canonize, that you choose for canonization?
Oh my gosh, that's a hard question. That's a hard question because there are so many choices, but also because my brain has a hard time holding on to any author's name. Like I read tons of books and immediately forget every detail as soon as I close it. Can I have a different question? Let me pass that one. I don't know if I can answer that one.
So I will pick because I've made this joke so many times. So I'm going to give you one death because of your book. So I have joked multiple times in the show when people said, "Oh, death." I was like, "Well, I'm not going to ask you what happens after we die." But you brought it up in your book. So I'm going to ask you, Kate Anderson, what happens when we die?
Okay, that is such a great question. That is seriously why I wrote the book, because I was wondering. I grew up religious. I grew up believing in heaven, not really believing in hell, but believing in an afterlife in heaven. I think I still believe in that. But I don't know that I don't know if I can really explain this, but once I had a dream, and it was kind of a sad, morbid dream, because in the dream I died. And as I was dying in my dream, I was so sad because I was leaving my children. My kids were pretty little. They were like preschoolers at the time. So in the dream, as I died, I was devastated. Not because I thought they wouldn't be cared for, but because I was going to miss watching them grow up.
Yeah.
And as soon as I died in the dream, it became clear to me that I was still there with them. And I can't really describe how comforting it was. I wasn't in a different place. I wasn't in heaven watching them. I was there with them, watching them grow up. And it was kind of a profound dream. I don't know if that's what happens after we die, but it was a really comforting, beautiful thought, because I felt so comforted in this dream after I died, that I was still there with my children. And even though I knew for them, they couldn't feel me and it wasn't the same, it was like a different, it was like it was all okay for me. I don't know. It was like I was on the other side of it and it was all okay. So if I had to choose what happens after we die, I think that's kind of a comforting feeling to feel like you can be with the people you love, you can experience their lives, you can watch over them, and then they'll join you afterwards. Yeah. So that's what I would love to say happens.
Yeah, I like that. It's funny, because my brain is a weird place. Like I was thinking about, I was like, oh, that's really just this idea. And then I'm like, okay, as a living person, how many people are hanging out in my house I don't know about?
I know. Maybe I don't want that. No.
Yeah. I mean, it's just weird. It's weird to think about it.
But the people who love you.
Yeah. It's like, please tell me you're not hanging out in my bedroom. Please tell me you're not hanging out in my bathroom. If you're going to watch, that's great, but boundaries, So.
Yeah. See, my dream didn't get that in depth, so I don't know the answer to that one. I don't remember.
But no, I do like the idea. Well, I think becoming a parent does make you think of your own mortality a lot.
Yeah.
But I think it is comforting to think that there is something that remains. And that's I joke about being, agnostic about everything to some extent, but I do, just from my own experience, feel like, my parents have both died. I was a child of much older parents. Like they were, both almost 40 when I was born. So like a lot of my relatives were a lot older. And so, there's just not a lot of my older generation family left. And it is comforting to think that some part of them is still there and looking out for you. And, yeah, I like that. So.
Yeah. I mean, one last little plug for Olive. Really, I wrote, she was grappling with this because I was grappling with this. And what I would love readers to come away with their own interpretation of death. Olive comes to a conclusion at the end of the book. I don't, I don't necessarily, I'm not trying to convince people. Like I would love readers to come to their own conclusion and not necessarily the same conclusion as Olive. For me, it was just, like I said, Olive is wondering, like, what's the point? If there's nothing after we die, what's the point? And that's kind of how I felt. It really felt like, why are we doing all of this if there's nothing after we die? And so, yeah, for me, I've chosen, to think there is something after we die because the alternative just seems, it doesn't really make sense to me. So that's where I have come. That's what I have landed on. But I would love for everybody to kind of, draw their own conclusions and get to their own answer.
Yeah. No, and I think the book invites that to you as we follow Olive's journey. And I will just shout out again for folks who have not read it. Go get this book and read it. It is lovely. And if you, like me, were kind of soured on YA, I think this will change your mind about it, because it's lovely. And Olive is not a whiny teenager. She is a thoughtful powerhouse of a girl that I just fell in love with her. So yeah, go get this book and read it. And Kate, thank you for coming on and sharing your process and what's coming up for you. We just really appreciate it. And
well, thank you so much. It's been wonderful.
Maybe when Lonely Places come out, let's do it again.
That would be great. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, take care.
Okay. Thank you so much.
WitchLit is a production of Thousand Volt Press and is edited by Julian Rashke. Our intro music is Cosmic Glow by Andrew Kay, and our outro music is Voices by Alexander Shenekar. Sue Fertal edits our transcripts, which are available with all of our previous episodes at witchlitpod.com. You can follow us on Instagram and Threads at witchlitpod. Please help other witches find us by leaving a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you for listening to and reading WitchLit.